Great. Good evening. My name is Noura. I'm a PhD candidate in political science here at Duke, and we wanted to welcome everyone to our live conversation. So we're 48 hours away from the 2016 presidential elections, and this serves to be a historical election for many reasons. This is the first time that we have a woman nominated by a major party to be president. It's the first election we've seen after having our first Black president serving 2 terms finish up. And in the last 8 years, the demographics of America have changed, the politics have changed, so much has changed. And as November 8th comes around, one of the big questions we have is, does voting matter and what's at stake? So we wanted to have a conversation within the Afghan diaspora about this and try to get a sense of the scene. So I wanted to introduce the other panelists. And what we'll do is have you introduce yourself and ask you, do you think this election matters and what's at stake for you? And I'll kick off to my far left with Ali.
Salam, everyone. My name is Ali. I do think that voting matters. And why do I think that this election is important? Mostly for 2 reasons. One is something to vote for, and that is a female candidate, as well as the most progressive platform in recent history, as well as voting against something, and that is one of the most dangerous demagogues that America has ever faced. So yes, this election very much matters.
Hi, everybody. My name is Arash. I do think voting matters. And it matters because American Muslims and Afghan Americans face an existential threat due to the policies of one of the candidates in the election.
Arzo?
Hi, everyone. I'm Arzo from Washington, D.C. I think voting matters because immigrant communities are increasingly becoming a very powerful civic and political force, and we've seen it happen in previous elections, and I would hope that we can contribute to becoming more of a larger influence in this election and more to come.
Hi everyone, my name is Ilyas Kamal. I'm from Fremont, California. I'm currently a 2nd-year student at De Anza College studying political science. I've seen firsthand the importance of voting, and going off what Arzu said, it's definitely our civic duty to do so. And this election season, it's especially important, seeing how high the stakes are, but also with local elections, given the measures and props and other candidates that will affect us directly in the local community.
Saba?
Salam, everybody. My name is, I'm in the Bay Area, California, and voting matters to me because it is one way that I'm able to exercise my voice, and it's a privilege that it hasn't even been a full century since women have been able to vote. So I feel like it's an honor and a privilege and my right that I choose to exercise.
Wally? We can't hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there we go. Yes.
My name is Wally Kogadai. I think voting matters because, like everyone said, is a right, and also one of the candidates is pretty much against Afghans and Muslims and minorities as a whole. So I think it's important that people vote, especially in this election.
Great. Now, one of the biggest questions, one thing I was curious about is who's a first-time voter? And I know we have a few on the call. So I wanted to get a sense, how does this election feel for you, given that it's your first time voting, and especially for the younger generation that's just turned 18 and is getting into the election cycle? Like, what are the thoughts on the ground? And I know Ilyas has organized a lot, so I thought I'd ask you, Ilyas, kick that off.
Yeah, absolutely. As a 19-year-old, it is my first time voting. for the presidential election. I did vote in the primaries for Bernie, but I've seen a lot of apathy in general, primarily from Bernie supporters as well. There's a lot of young college students who were Bernie supporters and are choosing to vote third party or not at all. However, I understand how high the stakes are, and I have been helping register students on campus to vote. And even those who aren't able to vote, let's say they're under 18 or they're international students, which we have many over at De Anza, they're still very involved in volunteering and helping get the word out, canvassing, getting others to register to vote. But regardless of the stakes, I'm excited. If not for the national elections, then for the local elections. I serve on the college board at De Anza College, so that's another election that I'm really looking forward to, because there's just so many different ways that they will affect you directly, like the various props and measures I mentioned, whether it's through education policy or funding for transportation, other things.
But Elias, when you talk to classmates, are they talking about the presidential election or the local? Like, is it hard for you to bring up the local stuff? Like, what are they focused on? Like, what's the noise on the ground on college campuses?
I definitely think the national election has really sucked the air out of room, and it's really created a lot of apathy and tension. It's definitely exposed a lot of hatred and discrimination, and that tends to cause people to fear getting involved or even exercising their right to vote. And to be honest, there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to local elections. People don't really understand the various props, measures, and other ways that you can vote, whether it's city council or Congress or whatever. So if people are, very worried about the national election, we let them know that, all right, yes, California is a swing state, is not a swing state, but you do really have a say in these local elections. So we kind of use that as a platform to jump off and show how it does directly affect them.
Great. Welly, I wanted to get a sense, I hear that you're also a first-time voter in the presidential election, and I wanted to get a sense of what your thoughts were going into this. Are you excited about this election season? Like, what are your thoughts?
For me, yeah, this is my first time voting for the presidential election. I did vote in the primaries for Bernie. That was my first time. I actually got my parents out of the house. They were having chai at the moment. And I'm like, you need to get up. You need to get up. We're going to the polls. So I got my mother and father out of the house, got them to the polls. But am I going to do that for the presidential? Probably not. Just to be honest with you, I'm probably not going to put that same effort for either Clinton or Trump, just because I'm in California. And for me, the local election is more important, some state propositions. But as far as the president, I like neither one of them. I wouldn't vote for either one of those guys. So that's how I kind of feel for my first time voting. I just don't have a really good selection. I mean, if it was Obama back in the days, I would have went with him. But now we got these two, and honestly, I don't trust one, and I don't like the other guys. So for my first time voting, it kind of sucks. So that I don't get to vote for a president that I actually want. That's my stake in this.
Arash?
Okay.
First presidential election as well. I voted in primaries, but I voted in midterms before in local elections here in Virginia. But this is my first presidential election, and that's honestly a little bit exciting to me. I remember back in the day, 2008, 2009, I went to the inauguration, and I've covered Obama's rallies, so it does give a special meaning to it this time. So that's why I'm excited about it to go to the polls on Tuesday.
And how about for returning voters? How does this experience feel for y'all? Do you feel as enthusiastic as you did before, more enthusiastic, less enthusiastic? What's your sense going into this for folks who have voted in a presidential election before?
This one's been really, really interesting. And it's like a combination of all the hype that's been occurring this election season. I mean, it kind of started last year, you know, when people were running and you saw, like, we got to see who the nominees were. And like, I think what was shocking is what started out as a joke with someone like Donald Trump running actually became who is a potential, you know, who could potentially become our next president. So there's definitely been a lot of energy, anxiety, and I think I was excited, like, you know, an exciting moment in our history to have a Black man run for president, but just the first female president. But also, I think, like, with a lot of the rhetoric that's been out there, that's been, like, you know, just kind of galvanizing this entire campaign, a lot of hateful rhetoric that's been targeting our community, you know, in many ways, the Muslim community, a lot of minority communities in general. There's also, like, I've just felt to really be more civic engaged. And part of that comes just from my own consciousness, but it also stems from my work in the community and the civic engagement efforts that we do through the office I work at, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations. And so I've been really, really excited, and I've been able to interact with other community members and try to get them to register to vote this year. And so it's just like the anxiety and the excitement for this elections is, at least like in my experience in voting, is almost unprecedented for me. So I'd be curious to how, like, what everyone else's experiences are with that.
Halija?
Yeah, I think for me, it is a high level of anxiety, I should say, that I haven't felt in previous elections before, and I participated in a few presidential elections. On one hand, it's interesting to be part of history, right? But on the other hand, this election has made me very turned off to the political process, something that I was actually very interested in most of my life. You know, I want to participate in elections, I want to participate in local elections, but this presidential race has made participation tiresome. It's made it exhausting. And part of that is because I think that there's so much at stake at this election. So it is anxious for me, and particularly because I view this through the lens of history. I'm a historian. And so I look at it in terms of long durées. I don't see short-termism. I don't see 4 years of Obama, 8 years of Trump, or whatever. I see what's going on. So what we have before us is two very different visions of the world that started decades and decades ago. You have one political party that absorbed and embraced the civil rights movement, the Democratic Party, and has been working on coalition building, on creating the demographics they need to win, reaching out to minorities, to Muslims, to women, to people of color, to poor people. And you have another group that from the era of the civil rights, from Nixon's campaign on, from Lee Atwater's Southern strategy, has insisted that their demographic be white and angry. And this has all reached a kind of critical mass with the election of the first Black president, Barack Obama.
Alijan, can you speak up
that,
a little bit? Just sorry to interrupt you, but the viewers wanted to
That's
hear
right.
you, and so you speak up a little bit.
Can you hear me
Thank
now?
you. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. So this all comes to a boiling point with Barack Obama. When you have the first Black president elected, the GOP had a moment to go, okay, what do we do now? And they elected to, rather than to reach out to minority voters, to radicalize their white angry base. So what we're seeing now is almost more historic than the election of the first Black president, because it's the direction that the country is going to take after the election of the first Black president. And that's what makes me very, very anxious, because we've seen this before in history and it usually doesn't end well. So anxiety is the one word I would use to explain this feeling.
And to throw a statistic out, according to what I was reading, I think on 538, 90% of Trump voters are white. And so that says a lot about playing off of what you're saying. But you said the historic election of Barack Obama as the first Black president. One question that has come up is people mention Obama a lot as being a historic moment because he was the first African-American president. What aren't people excited about having a first woman president? Is it because it's Hillary Clinton, or is it because we don't care about women as much? What do we do with that? Because people aren't excited in the sense that they don't see this as historic about the possibility of having a female leader. What do y'all think? Arzo, do you want to take that?
I think we've just been so distracted by the joke of the campaign that it has been so far. I think that it's not that, for me, it's not that I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible that we have a female being president. Perhaps maybe we're moving so forward with this country that it's almost after President Obama, he kind of led the way for it to be possible for anyone of color that could have been born a Muslim to be the president of this country. So why shouldn't it be possible for a female president to occur? But I think we just haven't been able to highlight that because, you know, with all the absurd things that we've been dealing with the election, I think it's distracted us from seeing, you know, the significance of Hillary Clinton running. Whether or not you agree with her, whether or not you support her, I think there's something very, very significant about her running, and we can't unfortunately see that because we're so distracted by all the controversies surrounding, you know, the FBI emails and everything going on with Trump. So I personally think that's what it is. I know that's what I'm distracted by.
If I can piggyback on what Arzo said, that's exactly right. The entire media narrative has been focused on why are white people so angry this year, and why are they willing to pick such an angry white man to you know, run for office, and it has completely distracted from the other side of the spectrum, which is the most diverse coalition of voters who are picking a very historic nominee. So the entire media thing on all these working class voters from the Midwest, the flyover region of the United States, and meanwhile all the other people, which will probably be the majority of the people who are voting for a historic person, that's kind of been sidetracked, and nobody's kind of been paying attention to that. So Arzo is totally right when she mentions that we've been distracted by this one guy, and one angry side of the population is willing to vote for this demagogue, you know.
Yeah, can I piggyback really quick off of what Arash John said? Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think there's two factors that are playing. There are multiple factors that are playing into this. First and foremost is white privilege, right? So white privilege is at the heart and center of this election. What people are seeing as kind of the dying breath of white privilege when it comes to Donald Trump, that's inaccurate. What we're seeing is a rebranding of white privilege into white nationalism as a political force in this country that is going to endure for many years. As a result of this, you have the media narrative focusing on white economic anxieties, right? So I have seen breathless coverage of Donald Trump supporters. Why are they angry? What are their economic anxieties? As if brown people and people of color don't have economic anxieties. Even though when the economy is bad, it affects minority communities even more. But it's white privilege right at the heart of the coverage of this. So this is why the fixation is on Trump. Secondly, you have the patriarchy very strongly at work here. The historic element of Hillary Clinton, becoming the first major nominee has brought a lot of the worst sexist and misogynistic coverage. Things like talking about her health, talking about whether she has the appearance of being presidential. All of those play into a factor of why there's a sort of depression of the excitement for Hillary Clinton. But it's also not just uniquely a narrative thing. There is also pushback from those of us on the left who see feminism in a multifaceted way. There is something like white feminism, which benefits people of privilege more so
than people of color, the feminism of the global South. So Hillary Clinton is absolutely historic, is absolutely a moment that we're going to look back in the history books and go, wow, that was amazing. But it's also not necessarily a universal feminist victory. It's a victory for a particular type of feminism, and that is white feminism.
Ali John, I feel like you like brought this conversation to a good part when we're talking about like, you know, feminism and like women's rights and also like marginalized communities. And so like for me, when I see things like standing with the movement and Standing Rock in North Dakota, and that's happening, and we see Black men are still being killed and being targeted by the police, and when people are critiquing how drones are disproportionately, you know, targeting marginalized people abroad and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, you know, and so marginalized people are consistently being targeted, and they're constantly being, their rights are being abused, right? So I think that the influence communities, I ask this question for anybody. I'm curious to hear what your responses are. Noura John, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I can kick it off. So in terms of like minority voters, I think taking off moderator hat to go into political scientist mode, you see different trends. So for Black voters, Barack Obama was so important for so many reasons that the voter turnout in those elections was so proportionally high for them compared to other groups, right? This time around, what's been happening is Latino voters. So Latinx voters, at least in 3 states, the last prediction in North Carolina, I believe it's North Carolina, and Florida and Georgia, at least as far as early election voting goes, they've been coming at higher proportions. And so it's interesting to see the rhetoric that Trump is using against Latinx voters and how that's affecting this community. They're mobilizing, they're pushing back, and it's having a really profound impact as far as the data goes. On the grounds, I'd love to hear what folks on the grounds are seeing, because my sense is more on like the numbers side, on the meta side, but the conversation and the mobilizing, it's really inspiring to see. And so I guess one question I have is, do we see that kind of stuff, that level of enthusiasm that we see within Latino voters occurring for Afghan voters or not? And two, like what's going on the ground? And since Ilyas is on a college campus, I was gonna sort of popcorn him to answer in next. You are on mute.
Thank you. Absolutely, I definitely see solidarity, whether it's in person or through social media or through other outlets when it comes to things like Black Lives Matter or Standing Rock. We had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people checking into Standing Rock to fool the Mortein County Sheriff Department just a couple of days ago, because Native Americans by the thousands were coming in to show their solidarity, and sorry, not just Native Americans and Indigenous people, but others as well, to help fight for Standing Rock. And even with the Black Lives Matter, you see this huge sense of community of the African ancestry and other people from that diaspora. But unfortunately, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see that sort of solidarity and community when it comes to Afghans. Even with the Muslim community, when we are being attacked by the divisive and hateful rhetoric coming from this election season, we definitely do have some great Muslim leaders, but in terms of a collective voice, I'm not really seeing that as much. However, I don't think it means that as a marginalized and oppressed community, we should shy away and we should just let that be and be silenced, because we've seen historically entire groups of people being institutionally oppressed, being marginalized, being disenfranchised. And when we've seen when these groups fight back, it definitely adds into terms of change. It's not going to happen quickly, but it needs to start somewhere. And I definitely think this election season, it's definitely stirring up a lot. We have a lot of healing to do, a lot of unlearning from particular communities, but it can definitely be a wake-up call for the Muslim and Afghan community to come together.
I can chime in. So some of the community work that I'm involved with the Council on American Islamic Relations is every year we host something called Muslim Day at the Capitol. And it's an event that we have that brings together the entire Muslim community, and Afghans do join in with that as well, where we meet at the Capitol and we have meetings set up with elected officials to discuss certain specific bills and specific legislative matters that we want to push forward. So like, you know, so that's like one of the things that we do is we advocate on a breadth of civil rights issues, and that includes protections for immigrants, and that includes measures to prevent school bullying of like our children, and like the right to engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions movements, and also specific legislation that deals with police accountability. Just last year, we sponsored a whole series of bills. One was the Safe Place to Learn Act, and that was initiated by Assemblymember Williams, and it was actually officially signed on by Governor Brown as a result, just like at the end of September. And that act was actually designed to make sure that school districts within California are actually providing community resources for students that are subject to discrimination and bullying based on their actual or perceived Muslim affiliation or other religious affiliations. And that was because we saw a whole host of bullying incidents within just all over California to begin with. And this was a piece of legislation that Muslims really work together to help push forward and promote. And in meeting with these different legislators, they were able to actually successfully get that to work. But when it comes to voting, I actually want to bring something up. I do think that the Muslim vote, like the Muslim vote and the Afghan vote matters, but it's a matter of mobilizing ourselves. And I don't think that we're at that like strong mobilized place yet.
Yeah, Sab, I was going to chime in and see, like, before we get to mobilizing, like, I feel like one of the reasons we're not mobilized is, like, there is this distrust. Like, why are Afghans skeptical of democracy? Like, are they skeptical? Or, and, like, Wally, you have a really, like, amazing network and sense of the community. So I kind of wanted to have you chime in and give you your sense on the ground of what you've been hearing.
Mostly you hear all sides of the spectrum from Afghans. You know, you have a lot of people who are just, I'm not voting because I don't believe my vote counts, because it's all the elite forces, the 1% who is going to run it anyways, and doesn't matter who you bring in there because it's all puppet regime. You know, it's all puppets. You know, you hear that aspect. Just being, because I know a lot of people, and happen to a lot of people in the Bay Area, I hear different, all kinds of different opinions, but you hear that quite often. And some people who just are just turned off by, similar to what Ali was saying, a lot of people are just turned off by elections because just the way it's been handled between the between Clinton and Trump. So you have that aspect as well. So,
so what does that look like?
I don't feel that excitement that I saw in 2008 from Afghans. In 2008, I saw Afghans at Cal State Hayward with voting. People were like, sign up and vote. Let's get you guys to vote. Everybody was, I don't know, there was something different about 2008 that this election just doesn't have anybody too interested, in a sense of, you know, it's just not like 2008 for a lot of people.
And why isn't it like 2008? Is it that they don't trust Clinton and she seems more elitist than Obama, or?
That's what you hear often. It's, you know, you can't trust her. You know, it doesn't matter if you vote for her. She's giving you one face, and the moment she's president, she's going to change all her. She's going to change everything around, and she's not for Muslims, and she's only saying whatever she needs to say just to get elected, and that's pretty much it. Nobody trusts her. And then Donald Trump, on the other hand, is the exact opposite, where he just says exactly what he's going to do, and it's scary what he can produce and what he's producing in people. What Ali said earlier, along the lines of, it's creating, it's almost creating a civil war, like a new civil war. It seems like it's us versus them, and it's not versus us and them. It's like, if Trump gets elected, it's almost where I feel that Afghans are going to be too scared to, go out, be more like, I'm proud to be this nationality or this nationality, because you're afraid that someone's going to hurt you. It's coming to a point where people are just going to be scared to even be proud of who they are. And I think that's what a lot of Afghans that I've noticed, and that's what their fear of Trump being elected. It's kind of what I'm sensing from people.
And do you think that's like people may not show up to vote because they're so disillusioned by the presidential that they may not show up, and then that might affect local elections?
I can speak for it seems like for the Afghans in the Bay Area, a lot of them were like, I'm not going to vote anyways because of the fact that I'm not in a swing state and my vote really doesn't matter. If I wanted to go for Hillary or Trump, it's going to go towards Hillary. That's kind of what you're saying.
Okay.
Hearing.
And Araksh, you've been organizing with the Afghan American Conference Civic Engagement Task Force. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's been? Y'all have been phone banking and trying to get our generation to kind of. So do you hear this sort of sentiment that Wali John was bringing up? Like, what's the sense based on you? And you're in Virginia, so that's a different scene than the Bay Area, also.
Yeah. So towards the beginning of the summer, a few of us got together and started a task force, and basically the sentiment was that this does seem to be a very pivotal election, with one side really threatening some measures that would absolutely impact us, would impact our community, it would impact our community here at home, it would impact our community overseas. And so we basically got together and in a short amount of time try to put together something that would get people to vote, because that did seem to be missing. It did seem to me that a lot of Afghan Americans were apathetic or were not involved or didn't think it was important, whatever the reason was. So yeah, we phone banked to a bunch of people that were on our list, and the response was actually pretty awesome. A lot of people either were already registered and were like thanking us for reaching out, and some people were thankful to be reminded, and some people just needed that little nudge, and so I did think we had an awesome effect in getting people to at least participate in the civic process, which is absolutely important.
One question I have is, so a lot of what we're talking about, there's a presumption that folks are citizens. So what about non-citizens that want to get involved? Like, how do they feel with this election cycle? Are they important to get involved? Do you guys have a sense of folks that may not be registered voters because they're legally, they may be permanent residents or otherwise? Like, what's the sense from folks from that side? Does anyone have a sense of that may want to share?
Yeah. So in my work with the Phil de Anza Community College District, we've noticed a drop in enrollment with international students. And when our administration did research on this, they noticed it wasn't just specific to our district, but an entire state of California as well, primarily from Muslim countries. We typically get hundreds and hundreds of students from Indonesia, which is the most populated Muslim country. And all of a sudden it's dropping dramatically. And the fact of the matter is, these parents are completely scared out of their minds to send their kids and to pay 3 times as much as a resident for tuition and enrollment in these colleges. But from what I've seen, the politically active international students are just pushed more and incentivized more because they know the stakes are high and they want to get involved in public policy or activism, and this is their way to do so. And it's a similar effect towards undocumented students at our college institution. A lot of them acknowledge that, to be frank, they were not built for this. They understand that Silicon Valley has a rise in construction, and a lot of them, and I quote, say that they were made for construction jobs. And we've seen Donald Trump say this. We've seen this ingrained into people's mindsets, and it's a form of oppression. But from the standpoint of my friends and other fellow students, it pushes them to fight even back more. So whether they can vote or not, they're still mobilizing, coming together as a community and helping each other out to get the word out to register and vote.
Great, thank you. Arzu John, I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on what Elias said, and also circling back into you've worked extensively within Washington, within folks there, and get a sense of what that looks like. And do you think there's room for citizens and non-citizens to engage in that space? And what have you seen of Afghans being involved in that space?
Well, first of all, I have to commend the efforts of Ryan and everyone that was involved. I think that's incredible. It's community organizations and advocacy groups that are huge primary mobilizers of immigrant communities towards all forms of political engagement. So, I mean, organizations like CARE and, you know, these community initiatives like RAI, the organization I work with, which is also an advocacy organization, these organizations are really effective at reaching people that political candidates cannot. So they essentially help bridge that communication that's missing there. And so I found that that's also a way that people that can't vote or people that aren't old enough to vote because they're still in high school, they're not 18 yet, can get involved with at least the community. And so there's still some of that civic engagement work going on. I have gotten very involved in DC here with a number of many initiatives, primarily because, you know, both Republicans and Democratic parties haven't seen it in their interest to invest in us, in the naturalized citizens that we are in our group of people, because it's not part of their political campaign, political agenda. We're not their winning ticket. And so they focus their energy and their campaign on people that are already registered, people that are already likely to vote. They're much more easier to target. And I've basically been trying to work to make us a more relevant group of people by showing that, hey, look, we're there. Quite recently, a couple of us, we try to put together a fundraising event in which we would present the political party that the political candidate that we support with a check, primarily because if Hillary Clinton were to win, we want it to be remembered that the Afghan Americans supported you, that we cared enough to mobilize ourselves to, you know, lend our voice of support to you. And so, you know, this is our way that we were trying to get politically active financially, but there are many, many ways. And at the end of the day, it's just that, hey, we're here, we're an educated community, we're an engaged one, we want to remain relevant, bring us into the conversations about any policies that may impact us. And so that's essentially what my focus has been. And I have to say, our community here in Northern Virginia and DC, they've been very engaged. We get together. Just last Wednesday, we had a pre-election organizing meeting, and it was great. People have been canvassing all this entire weekend. People will be canvassing tomorrow, and Tuesday we'll be working at the offices for foreign policy professionals for Hillary Clinton. We'll be at the office making phone calls. So you know, we are getting really active, and we're doing a lot of groundwork. And it doesn't matter what candidate you vote for. I think it's just great that people are actually seeing this rise in civic engagement from our community.
And as we kind of like push folks to kind of do this last push effort, is there like how do we address the disenchantment? I know like there is some, like, for the Black voter turnout was down, right? So I wonder about those questions a little bit too as we think about mobilizing folks in the last 48 hours. And then I know it's something that Ali John had spoken about before, so I was curious to get his take on that.
Yeah, I think voter participation is something that the U.S. struggles with a lot. We're 26 in voter participation, and that's just as a whole. Now imagine the effect that has on the minority communities, right? So Afghan communities, Muslim communities, African American, etc. The one sort of community that is most active is women, right? Women are probably the most consistent voters in recent elections. But voter participation is something that the US has struggled with. You look at countries like Denmark and Belgium, you have 86, 87% voter participation. Now, mind you, they are smaller countries and less diverse. And there are a variety of different ways, there's a variety of different reasons why this is a problem. Democracy is extraordinarily fragile as a system as it is. There's a reason why we should be skeptical of it, because it is a fragile system. Inherent within democracy, for example, is always the potential for the tyrant and the demagogue. It's built into the system. The Greeks themselves, when there was trouble, they would suspend democracy and elect a tyrant. So democracy always has that inherent in it, and so the only way to safeguard that is really education. And by which, when I say education, I don't mean Ivy League, getting your degree, not this kind of elitist idea of education, but usually two forms of education. One is cultural literacy, understanding the world around you, right? If you don't do it, you end up becoming someone like a Ben Carson, who's got his degree in medicine, but is a complete moron in everything else. I always tell my humanities students that this is the reason why you should be taking humanities classes. You don't want to end up like Donald Trump or Ben Carson. The other aspect of this is civic literacy, right? There's a lot of people that don't know how the government even works or what voting even does, right? So we've heard regularly that, oh, I'm in a swing state. I'm not in a swing state, so my vote doesn't count. That's not true. Your vote does count. It brings up the popular vote, and where the popular vote goes, that shifts the electoral college as well. A good example of this right now is Texas, Georgia, and Arizona, that have been reliably ruby red states, but are now going purple this election, meaning that even if Donald Trump wins them, in the next few cycles, they will become swing states. And that's because minorities and Democrats have come out and voted and pushed it in that direction. So voting matters. How do you reclaim power, right? So you have to mobilize, you have to legislate, you have to be partaking in the political process, you have to participate in the education process, and media representation. If you do those four things, you have an opportunity as a minority community to shape the broader society, and it is what other minority communities have done in the past. Always mobilize, participate in legislation, participate in education, and media representation. It's like the four pillars of success for minority communities.
We got to share that recipe with other folks. Get that recipe out there. And that what brings up local. So we all live in different places. I live in North Carolina. Some of y'all are in the Bay, SoCal, Virginia. What is going on in the local scene, and how do we bring that conversation up to? Is there anything going on that's high stakes locally in your areas that you all think would be important to share in this conversation? Or what would you tell your BB John, your grandmother, about local elections? And in the political science world, we call it down ballot voting. But what's the real talk about local elections and their importance? Because we've been bringing it up, but I want to if we really bring it down to a level where we can have a real conversation with folks that may be disillusioned by the presidential election process, what does that conversation look like? Arash, do you want to? I know you had or go ahead, Saba.
Does someone else want to go?
No, go for it.
That's totally fine.
It's all you.
I was gonna say, oh God, I think it's really easy for the Afghan community, and just in general, the greater American community, to zero presidential election and not realize that there's actually a lot of other important things to focus on, like local measures, state measures, and the people who are running for legislative office. I think there's a lot of times that great weight is placed on presidential candidates, but the people who really make huge decisions on matters that impact us domestically and abroad, are the people that we elect into office, right? Into Congress. And it's I've noticed that there's also, there's great potential there too, because not everybody is always informed or educated on the matters that are, on the propositions that are proposed in their states, on the local measures, on the people who are running for office. They might not know what their history of voting is on different matters. And so that means that when a person does educate themselves and they are informed, that their vote can have that much more potential. And just like, you know, there's been situations in the past, this goes back to voter mobilization too. A lot of times on these measures, it's by very slim votes that they get passed or someone gets elected into office. And so the vote really, really does matter in these issues. And there's a lot of and I actually highly recommend people to go out and try to find a voter guide in their state to see what issues are out there, because there's a lot that's out there, and it's hard to, the literature is pretty extensive. But once you find out what the summary is on the propositions, once you realize what a yes vote means and what a no vote means, it's a lot easier. And try to find out if there's if any organization has put together a scorecard for people who are running into legislative office. Find out what their history in voting has been in the past. If they have voted on measures that benefit our community favorably or not, because that's going to tell you how they're going to vote in the future. A lot of times when we focus on presidential candidates, we look at, as Afghans, I've noticed, we look at what their positions are in terms of warfare and foreign affairs. And so what we don't realize is that there's a whole process in the US government that involves the legislative body where there's people in the House that are actually voting on things. And we have to be mindful of who we're putting into those seats, because their votes are the ones that end up impacting us here domestically, but also our sisters and brothers in Afghanistan.
Arash, you've been working on local stories too. Is there anything that comes to mind based on things you've covered on the local side that you wanted to bring up, and based on what you've seen?
Yeah, so we've covered some stuff here in the DC area, Virginia and Maryland. And Virginia is just one of those really interesting places. So the congressional race is competitive and the presidential race is pretty competitive. And that's been a sea change since maybe 8 years ago. We only started becoming a purple state 8 years ago. We have a Democratic governor, but a Republican state legislature. And our congressional seat is a toss-up. So there's some really interesting things going on, and we're only becoming more competitive like this because the region is just becoming so incredibly diverse. The highest Latino turnout is actually about 5 miles from where I live in Pennsylvania. 80% early voting. Which is by far the highest, and it's one of the fastest growing Hispanic populations. So that's one of the interesting aspects here in Virginia. And to piggyback on what Saba said, it's kind of hard to get people to turn out in non-presidential races, but people should know that the down ballot issues that are on the table, whether they're propositions or in Virginia, we have a meals tax. You know, people go out to eat all the time, so it directly impacts their life, and people should be aware of that.
Ali John, you had a story I wanted you to share, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to share it. I think it really goes to the what's at risk and what's at stake and why voting matters, I think. So there's my Baba John, my grandfather, on my mom's dad, has been voting in every election since he became a citizen. And by every election, I mean every election, local elections, midterm elections. And what he does is he saves all the papers that the party sends him. And he has me sit down and explain all the ballot measures and various politicians, where they stand on things. And
in Farsi or English?
In Farsi. So he doesn't speak English very well. So I have to sit there and translate and explain it to him, which is always a bit of a chore, but it's really cute. And then on election day, it's our tradition, is I vote really close to my house. I go and vote first. Then I go and I pick him up, and he wears his suit. He always wears his best suit to go voting. He says you have to wear a suit when you go voting and when you visit the doctor. Those are the two things that he wears his suit for. And then I take him out and he votes, he gets his little sticker, and then we go out and have lunch. And it's been a tradition. Every election, he does not miss it. And, you know, I talked about civic literacy. It's not about what you do in school. It's about how you keep yourself informed. And that's what he does.
That is so inspiring. Thank you. I hate to then add a kind of like real twist to this. One question that came up on our Facebook page, because we've been trying to elicit folks to ask questions, is one of the realities we have is that there are folks in our community who support Donald Trump. And no one has like been super comfortable kind of coming out and discussing it. We invited some folks to come and publicly talk about it. But we need to sort of take that voice into consideration. So turning from local back to presidential for a moment, can anyone sort of consider why there may be Trump voters amongst the Afghan community? I know, Waleed, did you want to share your thoughts on that?
I think probably because he's against the establishment. And I think I would think some Afghans and Muslims are for that because he's against establishment and he's against what Hillary's for, the 1%, and he's against all that, and he's against certain things that, and also because he talks simple. I think he's, you know what you're getting with him, rather than with Clinton, you don't know for sure, and that's where the whole trust issue kind of kicks in. But I think with Donald Trump, you know exactly what you're getting with him, so what you see is what you get, you know. So I think that's why I feel that some Afghans might be leaning towards him. He might be against the establishment and against, like, I think he might have a better political. I don't know. I don't know why people would want to be for him. I'm thinking just because he's against the establishment. It's from mostly what I heard. I can't put myself in that position because I don't see why would somebody want to vote for him. But I think that would be the main reason I've heard so far is he's against the establishment, and he's clearly, you get what you get with that guy. So that's what I've heard. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, just briefly, I feel like what I've noticed in this elections is that it's kind of like as if like it's like two rivaling sports teams are against each other, you know, like Republicans versus Democrats. And, you know, sometimes it's like some people want to be their, you know, diehard supporter of their team. I hate to say it like that, but I feel like it might not be necessarily about Trump, but about supporting their Republican stance. So that's something that I've just seen in the community, not just the Afghan community, but like the greater Muslim community. But I'd be curious, like it's something that kind of has always baffled me. But I mean, there are people who stick to, you know, their party preference, and I think that might be part of it too.
And there's the reality that one of the things that we have to, Muslims are new Democrats in the sense that, I know, Saba, you may have touched on this, like, they're wealthy. The history of immigrant Muslims in the country is that we're generally more wealthy, right? And it's a history that you see amongst Latinos too, that you had like a sizable wealthy contingent of Latinos. But as folks experience more discrimination, that's when they've done this partisanship into the Democratic Party. So it's always interesting to me how financial interest plays into self-interest. Like, what's more at stake at you? Is it like small businesses? So Wally brings up a good point, and with Trump, what you see is what you get. And then there's also, I think, in addition to that, this sense of financial interests, which we have a lot of folks that are in the higher SES, and that's a reality, and that's something we should be proud of. But people are also making financial decisions, but then you take into consideration experiences of discrimination and how people are treated as a minority, and that complicates the picture. So there definitely is still a huge contingent of folks amongst the Afghan community and amongst the Muslim community that are Republican. It's just, and it was primarily so with like Bush versus Gore, and you saw the shift after that. But I think that's an important reality, and so you still see the lingering effects of that. And I wonder how, like, Arzo, do you see folks in the RNC that are Muslim or Afghan, like in DC?
Yes, I do. I do. They are people that are generally well off. They have a lot more of it. It's more of a financial decision that they've made. For them, they've seen rising healthcare costs for their employees, so they feel that this candidate, whether it's Donald Trump or who else, represents a stance that would help reduce those costs. And so it's generally people in more affluent positions that I've seen that are just not generally voting Democrat, whether it was Donald Trump or somebody else in his place. They just want somebody that's more fiscally conservative. And since Donald Trump has spoken to, the current economy in so many different ways, this has really, really appealed to those group of Afghan peoples. But they're definitely there, and it's a growing number of Afghans.
It's a growing number of Afghans.
Growing number of Afghans, yes. I mean, definitely a lot more than the last election. I was surprised because, even when we were Mitt Romney, which is a candidate I did like for the Republican opposition, you had less Afghans then. And it may just been that I was maybe not as involved to have seen what kind of involvement or what the consensus was amongst the more conservative, fiscally conservative Afghan groups. But you are having now people be a lot more outspoken about their opposition to Hillary and their support for Trump.
Okay, great. So we're wrapping up now, and what I wanted to end the conversation by asking each panelist to tell me, what are your hopes for Tuesday, and what are your hopes Tuesday forward? Because the things don't stop with the elections on Tuesday. It's just a chapter for another chapter begins on Tuesday. So irrespective of which ending we get or which way the path goes on Tuesday, what are your hopes going forward after Tuesday? Especially with respects to how this affects the Afghan community. Ilyas, do you want to kick things off for us?
Sure. My hope is that, like I said earlier, we do a lot of healing. I think the next president definitely needs to be accountable, but we also have to do a lot of internal healing and processing and learning for those who've sided with bigotry and hatred this election season. And I'm really hoping this is a wake-up call for the Afghan community, for them to join in the great efforts of organizations like CARE or in their other various local politics or whatever. And I'm hoping this also brings us together as allies with other communities. The next time we see a Black Lives Matter protest, or when people are openly discussing Standing Rock on Facebook or something, I want to see more Afghans involved in that. And lastly, I want to see Afghans feel more welcomed in this nation as a whole. Whether it's the new immigrants coming or the ones already living here who have to live with the hateful rhetoric of Donald Trump and other people from the right wing. We have to face that. We can ignore it, but we can use it to bring us together and build a stronger ties and a stronger community overall.
Are you going to run for office one day?
Hopefully, inshallah.
Okay, perfect. Arzo John?
Well, actually, the whole running for office, I really hope you do, because that's another thing I think is really important, and this is why I get involved in politics. It just during Obama's last election, 80 congressional candidates were from immigrant communities. Well, the candidates were, and of those 80, about nearly 51 seats. So I think that's remarkable, and I feel like if we had more candidates with immigrant backgrounds that ran, that'd be, I think, would do amazing things for our community. They have the ability to inspire, our community to get more involved, to because we need to cultivate and support more immigrants to run for office. And perhaps that will bridge this gap of, that we have right now, this distrust, this distance that Afghans are feeling with politics. And so I also hope that after Tuesday, people don't see it, people don't shy away from politics, because this is why does the Afghan vote, not just with the general presidential elections, but we'll have another election in a year for, you know, House representatives, and then for your own state governor and for your own senators. I mean, you know, stay engaged, stay in contact with your, you know, congressional districts. You are a constituent, you do have a voice. And so whenever there are matters there, stay engaged, stay informed, get your parents involved. So I hope that we're not just getting involved whenever we have a president running every 4 years, but we're also getting involved whenever we have any political issue that comes around that may impact us.
Arash? Oh no, Wali John, you're next.
So I think I just want to just piggyback off Ilyas and kind of say, I mean, if we want people to really care about Afghan issues, Afghans need to start caring about other people's issues. If we want some sort of change, you know, we have to be in the political process, and we have to have people who can represent of more Afghans actually running for government offices, or you know, really caring about the process. We're only going to make a change, I mean, only if we mobilize. If we mobilize in a huge way, that's when I actually feel that we're actually going to create the change. Otherwise, we're going to be depending on everybody else to speak for us. And does that candidate speak for Afghans or Muslims? It's whatever they want. So it's kind of like where we need to be in those offices. We need to attack before us to make any sort of changes. I think we need to attack the local level, which will be kind of like what Arzo was saying. We really need to get more Afghans into the political system. And until we have one body of voice speaking, like we have large numbers, we're all voting in one direction or candidate, those candidates are not going to come to us. In order for them to, we can't keep going to them with our hands like, here, help us, come, help me, help. We can't do that. You know, we got to do it ourselves. And if we're dependent on other people, I don't think any shit's going to get done that way. So we as a people need to stand up and like fight for other people's rights in order for us to be known as that's the type of people that we are. You know, we fight for not just our right, but for everybody's right. And I think that's the way of our religion as well. You know, we stand up for everybody, doesn't matter who they are. You know what I mean? If we see oppression, we stand up against it and speak out. So I think for Afghans to really make a change, I think it would be to a point where we got to get to that, what the 4 steps that Ali gave us, sure win right there. Just follow Ali's steps and we're good, you know what I mean? So just follow those steps. We need to mobilize, and I think we as a people will make those changes, but I think it needs to happen at the local level first, and then we can move on from that. So Ilyas should run for some sort of political office soon. So yeah, he could be our shining knight over there.
There you go. And Wali, it's interesting you say Ali, because I see Muhammad Ali right behind you on the wall, and I think that you've got like a symbolic importance. It's kind of connecting all of this, so that's really powerful. Thank you. Arash, did you want to share final thoughts?
Yeah, speaking of Afghans running for public office, there's a very young Afghan American who's running for public office in Santa Clara for a council seat. So my hope for Tuesday is that he wins, and that'll be really awesome. And secondly, I hope we defeat white nationalism.
Hey Arash, sorry to disturb you, Arash. What's his name, so that way people can know what his name is and maybe vote for the dude?
I think it's Ahmad something. I forgot.
Okay.
I added him on Facebook.
we can post it on the Facebook page when we find it. We can sleuth and post it for folks that are voting there.
There's a good profile of him in the San Francisco City Chronicle, I think. I'm not sure. I read a profile, but I can post it. So my hope for Tuesday is that we defeat white nationalism and fascism. Then my hope afterwards is that we, as Afghan Americans, mobilize and stand with other communities of color on a variety of issues that doesn't just involve voting or working with people in government, but that means organizing outside of, democracy takes more than just voting. So I hope we start to have our voices heard.
Saba?
The name of the fellow Afghan who is running for office, he's running for Santa Clara, I believe, City Council, is Ahmad Rafa. And we did have someone post an article on our event page, but we'll make sure to post that again. My hopes is in line with everyone else who went before me. I can't emphasize enough the power behind mobilizing as a community, as an Afghan community. We're not a small number of people, and when we're united, we can be really strong, really impactful, and really powerful. So don't underestimate the power behind our unity and the power that we can have when we mobilize. We can make big changes happen, and I highly encourage that everyone be educated, not just on the presidential candidates, but on the local measures, on the others who are running for legislative office. Be educated, and I see that energy out there, that people are wanting to be more involved. I see that with the RAI movement right now. So I hope that that only continues and it builds up, and that we can move forward. And I hope that more and more Afghans choose to mobilize and actually interact more with elected officials so we can voice our concerns. It's just like Wali said, like, we can't expect anybody else to do it for us. We got to do it for ourselves, and we got to show up for other communities if we want other communities to show up for us. So my hope is that everybody votes right now, and inshallah, whatever the outcome for Tuesday, that it doesn't break us as a community, but it only makes us stronger.
Thank you. Alijan?
I don't want to echo anyone, so I will say first that I agree with what everyone says. I think that Tuesday, I've never seen an election that has provided such a clear and stark contrast, and I hope that that mobilizes us in a way that has a serious impact. Just to give you an example, tonight, as we're speaking, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both holding rallies. Hillary Clinton's rally is being introduced by Khazir Khan, a Muslim Pakistani immigrant who is the father of a young man who died in Iraq. Whatever your feelings about the war in Iraq, that tells you something about the Democratic Party right now. Khazir Khan is introducing Hillary Clinton, while Ted Nugent, the so-called musician who called for the lynching of President Obama, is introducing Donald Trump. So my hope is twofold. One, that we restore our trust in our social institutions. This election has broken down that trust to a very dangerous degree, to the point that we now live in a post-factual democracy. The institutions and individuals that used to accumulate and sort knowledge are now no longer trusted, and we rely on Facebook and Twitter, which are great and fantastic, but when those social institutions go, democracy goes. We need to rebuild that together as a community, and there's a place for Afghans, not just for running for office, but being people who are advisors and academics and strategists at all levels of participation. And the second goal is to defeat Donald Trump, not just by a small margin, but by a massive margin. Because if he does better than Romney, then Trumpism is legitimized, and it will continue to be a political force that we will have to deal with. It is not coincidental that the man who led the birther movement is the nominee for the Republican Party. Any Afghan that runs for office, if Trumpism survives, will have to deal with the same show me your papers bullshit that Obama had to deal with from Trump. So he needs to lose, and lose in massive margins. And if he does lose, it'll be because Muslims gave Donald Trump an ideological test and he failed it, and Mexican Americans built a wall and made his ass pay for it. So I hope he goes down on Tuesday.
Thank you so much to everyone. This has been an amazing conversation. I think my favorite moment and my hope for Tuesday is thinking about Ali John's grandfather in his suit going out, not because the presidential election matters, but because local elections also matter. And this conversation was made possible because y'all bring such different perspectives, and that's something we as the Samawar Network hope to continue cultivating through these conversations. So please keep the conversation going on the Facebook page. If you have any comments or anything, please be in touch with us. Our contact is on there. And have a good night. Shab khair.